Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen. I'm a clinical psychologist who's been empowering disabled individuals, their families, and their support systems for over 20 years. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, where I curate tools, share mindsets, and promote habits to help the neurodiverse community thrive. Also, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. In this episode, I interview Nicole Ballinghoff, BCBA and Regional Director of Kyos, an ABA agency who is trying to redefine the practice of applied behavior analysis. Nicole and I talk about what ABA is, what it looks like, and how it works in real time. We explore why ABA has gotten a bad rap and how Kyos is disrupting traditional ABA practice by focusing on client and family strengths and by using relationships as a primary driver in client-centered treatment. We end the interview with Nicole's favorite behavioral strategy and the one skill she loves to empower in others. I hope that you enjoy this interview with Nicole. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
I love that you're here, and I love that we're going to be able to get into ABA today. But before we start that, if you could help us get to know who you are by just talking about your training and your background, that would be great.
Sure. So, my name's Nicole Ballinghoff. I am a board certified behavior analyst and the regional director for Kyos in LA. I think like a lot of people in my undergrad didn't really know which direction I was going and finalized an undergrad degree in psychology and I took a fieldwork class my final year and worked in a school for children with autism. And the first few weeks was a little apprehensive, wasn't really sure if this was the career choice for me. And they had us keep a journal. And after the second week, I realized, like, wow, I love this. Like seeing these meaningful changes, and I was working in a preschool classroom was just amazing to see. Um, from there, moved back home and started my work in the field of ABA and went back several years later for my master's degree. And I have a master's of education in applied behavior analysis and sat for my exam and kind of continued from there. So I started at Kyos as a BCBA and took a couple of roles throughout and helped mentor some of the other BCBAs and now help manage the LA region.
That's awesome. And for people who don't know what a BCBA is, could you help them understand what that is?
Absolutely. So it is a board certified behavior analyst, and you have to have a master's degree in psychology education. I believe there's one more related field, and have specific coursework included in addition to fieldwork hours, where you are being supervised by another behavior analyst and getting hands on experience in the field, and then have to take a written exam as well in order to get that certification.
Yeah. And it's specifically utilizing or applying behavioral principles. And so maybe the other, because I know a lot of times when we're in the ABA world or in the psychology world, we have a lot of acronyms. So just want to make sure who's ever listening to this understands what all those acronyms are. So can you define what ABA is generally?
Sure. So ABA is applied behavior analysis, and it's really studying the principles of learning and behavior. We're looking for what skills you can teach or strengthen using reinforcement, and primarily examining behaviors in a context. So looking at antecedents or things that happen right before them and consequences, happens right after them, to really help determine what the function of that behavior is and what is maintaining that behavior. So it really gives us a lot of clues as to why individuals are engaging in certain behaviors based on identifying those antecedents and consequences and really examining them to see what trend you're seeing across the board.
Yeah. So it's really focused on observable behaviors, right? And how we can impact the frequency, the increase of those behaviors or decrease them, in some way. And maybe you can talk to us about, the history of ABA because it has been around as a treatment modality for autistic children and children with other developmental
Mhm.
disabilities for a while now. So maybe you can help the audience understand how ABA maybe has come to be as an empirically supported treatment.
Sure. So I think when thinking back of how ABA started and what it was, a lot of us kind of in the field have taken a lot of strides to change some of the misconceptions people have about ABA. When it started, it was a very rote, repetitive learning style where kids were kind of drilled on specific topics over and over and over again, or the same target was run several times in a row. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen now, but I think the field has really evolved and used, I think initially ABA involved punishment. And now we look at using reinforcement to really, like I said, strengthen those skills or teach new skills as opposed to punishing those
Mhm.
maladaptive behaviors or other skills that we are trying to get rid of. There's also a huge component of ABA now that's really recognizing and valuing the neurodiversity of individuals, where previously, and I think, again, some people still have that understanding that ABA is trying to create specific types of people, and that's not what we're here to do. In my conversations with families, I'm talking to them like, I want to make Johnny be the best Johnny he can be. I'm not here to change Johnny. I want to help him learn these other skills so he can be more independent, increase his communication skills, his daily living skills, things like that. Instead of, looking at, I think for a long time, there was a focus on changing some behaviors, including those stereotypical behaviors that some parents refer to as stimming or flapping their arms, doing things like that. And when I talk to families and talk to them about it, like, is this interfering with their daily life? Is it impacting their ability to be present almost? So, one of the examples I gave a parent was, if your child is doing things with their hands and kind of watching them and acting some things out, if you're in the middle of a street and you're crossing the road, are they doing that and you're not able to get their attention? That's where I see it as a problem. Or they're in school and they're doing that so they can't focus on the lessons or they can't pay attention to what's going on around them. That's more of the time where I see like, okay, this is a problem. Maybe we just need to teach the child appropriate context when this is an appropriate thing to do, maybe, not in these other situations. But yes, I think applied behavior analysis really has been studied a lot, and it is an evidence-based treatment for individuals with autism, but other individuals and use in other contexts as well. So it is evidence-based as by the US Surgeon General, Academy of, American Psychological Association. So there are a variety of resources that really value this method of learning and show how effective it is in teaching individuals.
Yeah. And I do think that talking about or highlighting the evolution of ABA is so critical today because there is, quite a bit of backlash, I think, on ABA as a treatment modality. And, you know, there are multiple treatment modalities for autism that
Mhm.
exist out there, with ABA having a lot of empirical support, because in the past it was very rote and repetitive, and so it was easier to research in many ways. And I think what you're talking about is how do we not make someone, how do we preserve somebody for who they are? There's nothing wrong with that. And how do we increase their functioning to reduce the friction of life, right? Like, how do we do that?
Absolutely.
And so there's this focus on strengthening skills, building new skills, staying what I kind of heard you, in a way being strengths based, versus let's use punishment as a way to motivate behavior. I think most of us understand how punishment isn't very motivating. It might be motivating in the moment, for all the wrong reasons, but that's not really great as a way to teach someone a new skill.
Absolutely. And I think also a little additional information on in ABA when we're talking about reinforcement and punishment, it's not necessarily those first thoughts that a lot of people think of when they like punishment is usually, yes, this is something bad. People think of, hitting kids, engaging in, physical acts, things like that. Reinforcement is really anything that's added to a situation to increase the likelihood that that behavior will happen again in the future. And punishment is anything added or taken away that's going to decrease the likelihood of something happening again in the future. So it, that's a much broader, concept and conversation, but thinking of it as not just, engaging in a physical, you spank your child, you're adding something to decrease the chance that they're going to happen again. But reinforcers and punishers vary for individuals, and sometimes it varies per day. Sometimes a young child might really like being tickled, and that could be a reinforcer for them. And that day they're not into it, or somebody new goes to do it to them. Somebody new comes in and gives them a tickle because they think this is a great way to get them to interact. They do it, and all of a sudden the child kind of clams up and they're a little shy. They're not going to engage in that behavior. So we really have to evaluate regularly what things are reinforcing and which things are punishing to the individuals we work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And that in the colloquial sense, when people don't understand the scientific definition of reinforcer and punishment, that leads to a lot of misconception about
Mhm.
what's happening. And so I'm glad that you defined, more scientifically what a reinforcer and a punisher or punishment is so that people can understand that. Um, Traditionally, ABA has been outside driven or parent driven, teacher driven, other driven. And there's this real um, encouragement and push for things to be more client person centered in regards to, treatment, intervention, therapies, advocacy, right? So talk to me about Kyos' approach to ABA, because traditionally it's been other driven, but I understand that Kyo has a different approach to making goals, developing treatment plans, et cetera. So help us understand that part.
Absolutely. And that, I mean, obviously varies by age. The really little kids can't help, develop their goals, but they drive that session and what that session looks like. So, we're looking for what activities they're really motivated by, what activities they're really interested in, and finding ways for us as the adults to learn to implement their goals within that activity. So, if a young child is really engaged in interacting with vehicles. We can work on so many different things while playing with that activity without doing, like we said, that repetitive question asking over and over. It's more of, oh, can you find the blue truck? And they really have to listen to what you're saying and find that item. Or you can work on prepositions. Let's put the train under the track. Just a bunch of different things. And, if they get up and go on to another activity, we're following and engaging in those things, not forcing them to remain with that first choice. The older individuals get, I really focus on having them a part of their treatment planning. So, what are things that you want to do in life? What's important to you? Helping them identify those things so that we can help, as a team, create goals around that. All of our goals and treatment plans are developed with the whole family. So we're not coming in to say, these are the areas your child needs to work on. It's what's most important to you and your family and what's going to be most important to your child. For some teenage individuals I worked with, I, have broken it down for them and say, all right, these are some of the goals we talked about. You tell me you want to get a job and you want to live on your own and you want to go to college. These are why these things are important. So initially, something as basic as following three-step instructions doesn't seem meaningful to a 15-year-old. When I break it down and explain, okay, you want to be able to get to work, have a job, do all these things when your boss, you have to get to the office. When your boss comes into your office and explains the activities you need to do, you need to be able to kind of remember those and complete those. So we'll teach you a variety of skills depending on your needs on how to do that. If it's creating lists, adding things to your phone, like a lot of us adults do, creating calendars, doing all these skills so that they can understand the meaningfulness of those activities and understand why they're important. But we've really at Kyo focus on building a relationship with all the individuals that we work with. Our first few sessions are about bonding and we talk about, building rapport. And again, it depends on the age. The little ones were on the floor playing, engaging in these activities. Some of the older individuals I work with, finding out their likes and dislikes, helping them, maybe they can teach us how to play Roblox or how to play Minecraft or engage in some of these other activities and get them motivated and get their buy-in so that they're much more likely to engage with us and do some of these harder skills that we're asking them to do.
Yeah. So that balance of some foreshadowing, these are some skills that we imagine that will be helpful for you to have, considering the goals that you want. Right. And I primarily work now with teens and adults. And so that really speaks to me, where I want to motivate my clients to be the biggest agent, the biggest driver of their own life. And so,
Mhm.
they need to set their own goals, at whatever level they can. And then all of a sudden the treatment becomes meaningful because that's what they want. And so to be able
Definitely.
to break it down. And I've always seen ABA as a real great way to break complex things down into smaller steps, that can be taught little by little and over time so that someone can have some behavioral momentum to do those things on their own and independently. And that's the ultimate goal. But I've always seen ABA, to be strong in that regard, to be able to break bigger things down into smaller bite-sized chunks.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
I mean, that's everything as simple as, like, we think of tying your shoes as an easy, one fluid motion that for us as adults, but breaking it down into each single step for the children we're working with, like, okay, make an X. Then, and these are the things we refer to them kind of those steps as a task analysis. And before we write any of them, we complete the activity ourselves to see, okay, exactly how many steps are involved. But in addition to that, we work with the family to see if there are certain things that their house does. When I think of toothbrushing, for example, like, okay, do you wet your toothbrush first? Do you put the toothpaste on first? Whatever. Everybody does these things so differently. And at first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But if we're teaching individuals how to complete this whole chain of events, we want to make sure it's what's most appropriate for that household.
yeah. Yeah, no, even the tying shoes, right? Are you a
Yes.
bunny ear person? Are you a through the, I
Right.
mean, so, um, and in taking into account, I think the context of the family and the family system is so critical because that's where the biggest influence is for a child's life, even if I'm even talking about adolescent children. So when I say children, just, someone in the home that is younger and learning and going on to eventually be an adult, right? How important that system is because that system is the biggest influencer in that child's life. And so those small things I think do make a big difference. Nicole, earlier on we were talking about kind of challenging and you know promoting a different face, a reputation for ABA, as one that's more client centered and relationship driven, which have not been words actually that have been used in the ABA sphere. If anything, they've been used more in the DIR floor time arena.
Mhm.
Um, and kind of understanding how important relationships are when you are teaching difficult things to people, that a relationship's critical. Trust is critical
Mhm.
in that space. But you had also brought up neurodiversity, and that, something that you guys are trying to do is bring more, neurodiversity kind of thinking or neurodiverse thinking to your practice and to the treatment plans. Can you, expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. So, like I said, I think a lot of times previously or in the history of ABA, it's kind of these are the behaviors we want to get rid of. These are the behaviors we want to strengthen. And there's still, I had a phone call with a family not too long ago, and we talked through our approach, what things look like. And a couple days later, I heard back, and they were like, I talked to a friend, and they said ABA is really robotic and harsh on the children, and it's not necessarily something I want to do. And I said, let's have another conversation. Let's really break this down and explain what we're doing. Um, and going through that process of yes, like I said, we want to make help Johnny be the best Johnny he can be, not necessarily change who Johnny is. So if everybody has their own likes and interests, and we're not here to change those for the individuals that we work with. We're here to really help them gain the skills that they need to, like you said, the goals that they're looking at for themselves. How can we help them get to those goals, or how can we modify those goals to make them a little more realistic for the individual so that they can meet those expectations? Um, so if something, there are, maladaptive behaviors that we may need to jump in. If an individual is engaging in self-injury and hurting themselves or hurting others, we're going to help decrease the rates of those behaviors. But while we're doing so, we're working on replacement behavior skills. So going back to, like I said, looking at behavior in that context of antecedents and consequences. So what happens right before, what happens right after? We evaluate the behavior to determine the function and teach replacement skills that meet that same function. So if an individual is engaging in maladaptive behavior to get out of completing tasks, we're going to teach them more appropriate ways to get out of completing tasks. So initially, every time they request to not complete whatever it is, however that is, if it's through vocal language, through a picture exchange, however they're doing that, we acknowledge that and we want to make that response much stronger than the maladaptive behavior. So those are the behaviors that we are, yes, still jumping in to help to make that individual's life more, help them be able to grow and meet those goals. The other behaviors, such as, repetitive behaviors or engaging in self-talk, where they're talking to themselves or repeating lines of their favorite videos, things like that. We really look at it in that, family context again and the individual context. Is it impacting their ability to engage in their daily life? And I think that one example I said, like, you're crossing the street and your child is repeating lines from their show to the point where they're acting something out and start running across the street. That's a dangerous situation. But if they're doing it and you stop at the corner, remind them to look both ways, they're able to stop, complete that task, move on, and then, a little later they're doing it again. That's not necessarily a behavior of concern for me. They're able to attend to their surroundings. They're not impaired. Their ability to perceive the environment around them isn't impacted. They're able to, fully grasp what's going on in that context. It's more of a safety concern or impacting their ability to complete everyday tasks is when I'm more apt to um, interrupt that behavior or help them, engage in those other more appropriate replacement skills in those
Mhm.
instances.
Yep, yep. So it's almost like, developing a framework or a system in which to understand where intervention or attention is being applied, right? And so, even from a functional standpoint, I think we can safely say that we all have things that we like to do, that are our interests, and they're okay if they're not getting in the way of our daily functioning and the things that we have to do to stay
Right.
productive and healthy and safe in our life. So, this ability to help parents also evaluate behavior in this very kind of more drone's eye view versus this very specific kind of view, and that stimming and scripting are common behaviors that can interrupt functioning. Um,
Mhm.
all throughout the lifespan. And it's not necessarily, I think, a lot of times about elimination. It is about when it's appropriate because those behaviors can be very pleasurable for my clients. I mean, that's how
Sure.
I make the differentiation between a stim and an obsession. One
Mhm.
is pleasurable and one is distressing, and so, but sometimes stims can lead to distress. And so, how do we,
Sure.
balance that? Um, Nicole, for people who don't necessarily or who have never seen what an ABA program might look like in the home, could you give a brief description of who's involved? Like, let's say, who would be involved from Kyo,
Mhm.
um, and what that would look like in the home setting?
Sure. So in the home, there's one primary therapist who's working one-on-one with the child or an individual that is, getting our services. They are a behavior technician. And they come in, they're the one who is, and depending on how many hours per week, there might be one, there might be two, there might be three coming into the home. And they're coming in, they're the ones really building that relationship, focusing on, oh, the child sees them pull up in their car, sees them walking up to the door. They're super excited that they're there. We don't ever want it to be, I'm thinking back years ago, one of my first children I worked with, like I would walk up to the door, he's like, bye, Nicole, bye, Nicole. And then, we would have really great experiences, but sometimes I think he associates like you're here and it's time to work. And that's not necessarily what I want to do with my spare time. Um, so we want them to really be excited. We focus on really building that relationship. I think my favorite moment at Kyo was I was talking to one of my clients that I worked with, and we were going through a whole reinforcement system that we really built together. So I kind of had an idea of what it would look like, talk to him about it. I would develop it. We would meet like when I would come out to the house, we would look at it and he would, give me some suggested edits. I would go back, make some changes, and we really worked on it together. It was a really big team approach. And the goal was that we would use this in a variety of contexts. So this would be used in home, at school, with parents, everybody involved, so that he would earn access to preferred activities throughout the week for specific behaviors that he really wanted to work on. And we were talking it through, and he's like, I'm really comfortable with you and my BT, the behavior technician, working on this with me because you guys really know me. I was like, okay, well, what are some of the barriers in using this in other settings? And again, kind of talked through some things, and he was explaining that he felt like other contexts they were very goal driven and oriented, and that's what they were really focused on. I'm like, well, wait, you're making me sound like a bad BCBA. Like I care about the goals and I care about the data. Like these are important parts too. He's like, yeah, but you're my friend too. And that to me, uh, I mean, that's all I could ask for. And I really, talked to him about how much that meant to me. And I shared that, that's my goal. Because if we're coming in and asking you to do these things that are a little more challenging for you and not necessarily, these aren't easy tasks, but they're helping you in the long run, you're not going to do those things unless you trust me, unless you think of me as that person. And I think, particularly for a pre-teenage individual to say that about an adult coming into their home and working with them, that's all we can ask for. So, um, there's that behavior technician who's really the one, they're there running the goals, implementing them throughout the sessions. Um, Depending on the household and what, contexts there are, we really encourage family involvement and participation as well. So depending, some parents are there the full time and engaged fully in session. Sometimes siblings are involved, which is a great way to really help with those relationships too, because sometimes they're impacted due to the behaviors and the other situations in the home. So we can really help look for positive interactions between the siblings, or, helping support the individual we're there to work with on having more appropriate responses to their sibling instead of engaging in, some of those maladaptive behaviors we had discussed. Um, the family is there to observe, see the strategies we're using so that they can, copy those and model those throughout the week when we're not present. And then there's also a BCBA and sometimes another mid-level supervisor on the case as well, who they're coming in regularly, meeting with the family, observing that behavior technician, supporting them and providing ongoing training, as well as reviewing all the goals and looking at making sure we're making progress. And if we're not, what needs to be adjusted? If that goal is met, we don't want to continue working on it. So, updating all of those regularly and making sure we're continuing to work on meaningful things throughout sessions. But other than that, I think in a world outside of COVID, and we're getting closer there, we're also going into the community and supporting these families where they need the help the most. So we love to, go to parks and do play dates and do those other activities where we can focus on those social skills in appropriate contexts, helping some of the older children and teenagers going into the community, making purchases, going to a library, knowing how to find the items they need, ask for help, and be able to be more independent in those settings as well. So we're really providing that support, we kind of refer to it as home, school, and community, depending on where they really need the most support.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got some behavioral technicians on the ground, boots on the ground.
Hmm.
We've got a supervisor, if not more than one, overseeing maybe training, overseeing the program, making modifications, communicating with the family, making sure that goals are being met. And then before you start a program, do you guys do an assessment to kind of drive, what kind of reinforcers you might use or what kind of goals you might work on?
Yes. So before any family is getting started with us for ABA, we do an assessment. So we're doing a functional behavior assessment as part of that. So, like I said, that's where we're really focusing on the antecedents and consequences, looking at each behavior that's happening, what context it's happening in, and determining that why. Why is this behavior occurring so that we can teach those replacement skills. We also complete a Vineland with the family, and that's an assessment tool that helps really look for those strengths and areas of weakness for each individual to see where are the areas that they are delayed and what areas are they ahead so that we can focus their treatment goals in those programs. We are using the Vineland also as another way, other than their goals and the progress on those, to really measure progress and outcomes throughout their time at Kyo. So we that's all charted, and families are going to have access to all of that information, so they're able to see, in the domains of communication, socialization, daily living skills, where is their child making the most progress, or what area are they really below in, so that we can focus on that. Interviews with the family caregiver, and then we really like to observe the individual in a variety of contexts. So ideally, we like to see them in school as well. Right now, that's been a little different, but we've adapted just like everybody else. So I've observed distance learning lessons as opposed to going into a classroom to see a child if that was appropriate, to see how they're following directions. Are they responding to group directions? How are they interacting in that environment? Are they waiting their turn? Just looking at their behavior in a variety of contexts so we can really get a clear picture of what's going on and what are the areas they really need to focus on. And then from that assessment, we create individualized treatment goals for them. So we don't have a curriculum we're pulling from. Each goal is developed for that individual so that we can really make sure that they're making progress on those things that are most important to them and their family.
Yeah, that's great. And then, Nicole, what's the age group that you guys serve or feel comfortable serving anyway?
Sure. So we serve all ages. The youngest child I worked with was 15 months old, and we do serve up through adults as well. I think the bulk of the children we serve are kind of that in between, like between 3 and 10 probably, but we do have a wide range of services that are able to suit the different age groups. Like I said, it's really building those relationships and finding out what's most important to them and their families to make sure we're making meaningful progress.
Yeah, and how do families typically access your services from a funding perspective? What are some of maybe the ways that a family can get the services funded through Kyo?
Sure. So Kyo is primarily funded through health insurance. We're in network with the commercial insurance plans, so those are all available, and then different Medi-Cal providers in different areas of the state and Medicaid, as we've expanded to several other states as well. We are an NPA, so we do provide support in the public schools as well. In that situation, the school district would then contract us to provide services and help, you know, support the child behaviorally and support them on their IEP goals. So that process looks a little bit different, but that's another route to services also.
Awesome. That's great. And then in California, are you guys also supported or funded through Regional Center?
We are not. We do have, I think I take that back. I think we are through some of the regional centers. We're working on a couple of moving pieces with that. There, I know in LA, I'm working on vendorization, so families can actually sometimes get reimbursed for their co-payments through regional center.
Awesome. No, that's so great. That's so great to know.
Mhm.
And you know, from all companies have a comfort zone in regards to the behavioral profiles that they might take. And what I mean by that, just to be blunt, is aggression. Because
Hmm.
there are some ABA companies that don't feel comfortable taking very aggressive or children with very aggressive behavior. Where do you guys stand on this? If a family were listening, and I think when behavior does escalate to be aggressive, whether it's towards the self or to other people, things get very challenging. And actually, this is maybe where an ABA kind of structure could be really helpful. But you
Hmm.
know, and maybe you might only speak for your office or your region because you know the people in your region. But in general, where do you guys stand on your comfort level with managing maladaptive or aggressive behaviors positively?
Sure. So, like I said, we really want to help teach those replacement behavior skills. So, ideally, if we're, able to support that individual, we're looking for those antecedents and helping develop what we'd call proactive strategies. So, things that we would implement before the behavior occurs to reduce the chance that behavior would occur. So, looking for, why are they engaging in this behavior? Is it to get attention? Okay, we put them on a schedule of attention where they're getting positive attention throughout session at this specific increment to reduce the chance that that aggressive behavior would occur, for example. At Kyo, we do have a no restraint policy. So, depending on the intensity of the behavior, due to the fact that it is in a home setting with one individual present other than the family members, we just need to make sure everybody is safe in that environment, including the child and the staff and family. So, if we are able to manage that behavior safely, then we can absolutely provide those services and include, those proactive strategies, like I said, to reduce the chance that behavior will occur. Um, and we also really focus on teaching, calming and coping skills as well, and not just I think a lot of times people are like, "Oh, we just, teach them to breathe and do these things." That doesn't necessarily work for everybody. Or when you're already in that heightened state, having somebody tell you to breathe isn't going to help you calm down. So we really help find what things really work for that individual. How are they able to calm themselves down, or what things can we look for? There might be like a warning before that behavior happens. Maybe they start to tap their foot, or maybe they start to, rip up a tissue, whatever that might be, and looking for those things and jumping in at that point as opposed to letting it progress to this more escalated behavior. And then we're able to really calm the child down before they get to that point.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's you guys are comfortable with it as long as the behavior can be safely managed. And it sounds
Mhm.
like that's a discussion that you might have with a family or the school for that matter about what you guys can and cannot do. And
Sure.
that would maybe dictate, you know, if you can take a client or not. I think that's helpful
Absolutely.
for parents to understand because it's complicated. I think when aggressive behavior gets quite intense, it's a challenging situation for everybody. So
And I
that's
think yeah, being in the home makes that a little more difficult because there are, items around that you can't necessarily block or take away. Like the kitchen is there and those things are there. The living room may have, different pieces of furniture around that could easily be knocked over or things like that, where um, sometimes depending on the severity of that behavior in a more, um, you know, office setting or a clinic setting is a little easier to manage where you can remove those items. They're not necessarily there and pose an additional threat.
Yeah. So and just to be clear, your services are provided in the home, the school, and the community setting, kind of depending
Yeah.
on what the goals are and what
Mhm.
where the funding's coming from, obviously, as well is
Yes.
maybe going to drive some of that. Awesome. Okay, so Nicole, I'd love to end my interviews with this question, which is if you could only choose one skill to empower a person with, what would it be and why?
I think throughout my progression in the field of ABA, I think the skill I see most powerful is teaching children like how to say no and how to deny doing activities. It's been really insightful for me to see the amount of behaviors we're able to decrease, or the behaviors that don't necessarily escalate to a level where my early on experience, I didn't really see that as much. And like you said, ABA was a little more adult led and not necessarily client led. So we were picking the activities and we were kind of directing the nature of the session where, depending on the skill level of the client, you can do it in so many ways too. I've started with really young kids who don't have vocal language, just handing over a big stop sign, that's their way to tell me like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do this. And
Mhm.
that's it. It gets removed and we move on. But helping individuals know the power that they have of, you're able to make these decisions for yourself and you're able to, everybody, not everybody wants to do certain things all the time. And you have that ability to do it in a much more appropriate way. And it gets your needs met so much better when you appropriately ask to not engage in an activity or to be done doing something as opposed to engaging in that aggressive behavior or knocking all of your papers off the desk in school. If you ask to take a break or if you ask to come back to this later or to be finished, whatever that might be, is just so much more empowering for that individual and gives them so much more access to things later in life.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. The ability to refuse.
Hmm.
How important is that for everybody, right? Especially when you might not have your language lexicon in place. You might not even realize that in the moment you're not feeling good about something or you're distressed. How can we help any individual recognize that so that they can communicate and negotiate, navigate, collaborate
Right.
on what they're doing and what's happening to them, so how
Hmm.
important that is. And I think that's such a critical one, especially as we were just kind of briefly touching upon some of the history of ABA and where it's come from, and hopefully how you guys are trying to redefine what it's looking like today. So that's great. Maybe I could ask you this one more question, if you don't mind. Which is, what is one of your favorite kind of strategies or behavioral strategies that you use or you teach parents to use?
I think the first one that comes to mind, and it's the easiest to implement, is just giving choices. Um, Again, it really empowers that child or individual. They feel much more in control. They are more in control of the situation. But
Mm.
sometimes it's little things. I we just did potty training at home with my daughter, and there were times, it's time to go to the bathroom. That set things off, and things went in a different route. Um, but when it's okay, let's go potty. Do you want to bear walk or run to the bathroom? It doesn't matter how she gets there. She's still getting there, but she has that control over the situation. She feels more empowered and gets to pick how that happens. Um, Getting ready for dinner. Oh, do you want broccoli or peas for dinner? Or snack time, whatever that might be, giving them choices where you might still really be in control of the situation. It's not an open ended of what do you want to eat. Instead, it's do you want this or this? Um, but it really just helps with overall compliance and again that relationship because they don't feel like you're always the one there telling them what to do. They're part of the decision making process as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I can second that. I love choices as well.
Mhm.
And they work really at any age. So that's really lovely. Well, Nicole, if someone's listening to this and they want to find out more about Kaio, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So on our website, there's a lot of information. So kyocare.com, and that's KYO. On our website, we actually have links to upcoming webinars that are free and open to the public. So they're on there under our events page. And then there are also opportunities to either schedule an intake call if you are interested and want to move forward, or you can schedule a complimentary consultation with a PCBA. So either learning a little bit more about ABA, or if you have specific questions about your child and behaviors that might be going on at home or ways to teach specific skills, we can, set up a phone call and discuss some of those things as well.
Awesome. And I'll put your contact information in the description below as well. Thank you so much for your time today, Nicole. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Hey, if you're interested in finding out more about Kaio, their information is in the description below. If you got any value from this interview, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Doing so helps to get this information to others just like you. See you in the next episode, and thanks for watching.